So, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everyone to our talk tonight. Just so you know who I am, my name is Hind and I am a co-founder of Stewards.one, and we are an education company that works with building academic skills and character building, and in addition to business and career. Sorry, there's a lot of people coming in because I'm also letting people in the room. So before we start, because there's quite a few people coming in, if you can tell me where you're from, what part of the world you're from in the chat, that would be helpful. And then I will introduce Katie, who is going to be our speaker tonight, inshallah.
Who's talking?
Wakefield. Leeds. Inshallah. Huddersfield, inshallah. So for everyone who's coming in, assalamu alaikum. I'm just, there's quite a few people coming in. I'm just trying to let everyone in. So in the meantime, I've asked everyone to write where you're joining from tonight, or it's night in the UK, or if you're joining from another country, let us know, inshallah. And I will introduce Katie shortly, inshallah. So, okay. I think we're stable. No. Okay, so Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome everyone, and I'm happy for Reading. I used to live in Reading. Alhamdulillah. So welcome everyone tonight to the home education journey. I am really excited to present this talk to you. And for those of you who didn't catch my name is Hind, and I am a co-founder of Stewards. I also run our online school, and we are an education company focused on building academic skills, character building, and career and business development for individuals and families, inshallah. And I have with us tonight, actually, alhamdulillah, Katie, who's a friend of mine who I've known for quite some time. And I'm very honored to have her here. She is a homeschooling mother of 9, and I just want to see how many children. Her eldest 5, she has helped them to educate, reach the GCSE level until they went to college at 16, and she is still educating her younger children. And she is going to be talking about the home ed journey today with you, inshallah. What I would ask is that if you keep your questions to the end, is that okay, Katie?
Yeah, absolutely fine.
Yeah, so that she can kind of speak, and then you can either write them in the chat, or you can write them down and then ask her at the end, inshallah, and I'll be letting you guys know when it's time for questions, inshallah. And I think that's all you're going to hear from me. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Go on, Katie.
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Thank you very much for coming to listen. I can't believe there's more than 3 people who want to listen to me, actually, so alhamdulillah. So when I looked back at my homeschooling journey, when my children went through, like I homeschooled them, they did GCSEs at home, and then they moved on to college and they went out into the world. And I really began reflecting on how many twists and turns and changes there had been in that time. Like, it wasn't a pre-planned, neatly executed journey. We didn't start at A and take a straight line to B. It was something that was constantly evolving, constantly changing. It was more like a zigzag path. And then I started thinking a bit more, and I thought, well, why was that? Like, why did we change so often? Why did we adapt so many times? Why this constant evolving process? And I realized, well, what we were really doing was changing with our children. And so I would say we were really going with the different developmental stages of our children and adapting at each stage what style of homeschooling we did with them. And so what I really wanted to do was sort of explain what our homeschooling journey looked like. With the idea that inshallah ta'ala other people can take bits or leave bits, or, you know, it'll help other people gain the confidence, inshallah ta'ala, to make decisions for their homeschooling rather than just thinking they've got to stick with one style or they've got to do what everyone else does. So before we continue, I'll explain that when I use the terms homeschooling and home educating, I mean exactly the same thing. I know this is an area of controversy for some people. They say there's a huge difference. For me, I'm just going to say that they mean exactly the same. And when you start looking at them, you realize that they're both umbrella terms for this just mass of this huge number of philosophies, of methodologies, of ideas. You get loads of very strongly spoken opinions about what homeschooling can be and what it should be and what it must be. And for the sake of simplicity, I've just broken all of those styles into belonging to one of three main categories. The first one I've called unstructured. The second one I've called partially structured. And the third one I've called structured. Now, if we look at the unstructured end of the spectrum first, in this you would have unschooling and autonomous homeschooling. There are some others, but these are the two main ones that I see. Unschooling is basically where your children learn by being immersed in the real world, and they learn from real life experiences. So for example, if you wanted to teach your child about weights, you'd buy one of those old-fashioned weighing scales and you'd do lots of baking together and lots of cooking. And so by helping you weigh out, oh, this is a kilogram of flour, and they sort of maybe add a bit more flour, take a bit less, and then they'll realize, okay, that's what it looks like. And then they start using, okay, this 500 grams is half a kilogram. And then eventually you'd move on once they got the hang of what a weight looks like and what it means. You'd start maybe doing maths problems with weights. You'd say, oh, okay, we're going to bake a cake. The recipe says for 4 people, but we want to make it for 8 people. So we're going to double everything. So it says 500 grams of butter. What are we going to need? We're going to need a kilogram of butter. And what people argue with this is that children just learn much better if they're practically immersed in their lessons. So in school, if you're going to do weights, you might have a quick explanation of weights, and then you do reams and reams of workshops and of worksheets about what weight means and doing calculations with weights. The other style of homeschooling I mentioned that's on the unstructured spectrum is autonomous homeschooling. With autonomous homeschooling, the parent is basically a facilitator, and the child chooses what they want to learn. They pursue their interests. So for example, if your child develops a real interest in boats, you could go to the library and get out sailing stories, or you could go on the internet and look at different kinds of boats, shapes of boats around the world. You could do floating and sinking experiments. You might pay to go on a boat trip, or if your child was really enthusiastic, you could pay for sailing lessons. They can join a sailing club. But the point here, what people say with this, is that children just learn much better if they're really engaged and enthused in what they're learning about. And so if you have a child who's fascinated with boats, you don't want to sit them in a classroom where they have to learn about the parts of a flower. Now, this unstructured style of homeschooling, I learned about it first through a book that I would recommend. It's called Free Range Education, and it's by Terry Doherty. It's broken up into chapters, and each chapter is written by a different home educator. And they explain what they did with their family, why they chose this, and how it worked for them. So that's the unstructured end of the spectrum. If we move to the exact opposite end of the spectrum, then I've put structured. Now, structured homeschooling is where you get the more school at home methods. And this is where the parent is very much a teacher. So you might follow the national curriculum, or you might pay tutors. Some people sign up for online schools. But the point is that you or the parent is the teacher who is getting their child through lessons which they've decided. A slightly alternative version of this is the classical model of education, or the trivium, and this is explained in The Well-Trained Mind by Jessie Wise and Susan Wise-Bauer. Susan Wise-Bauer was the daughter of the two, and she was home educated, and then she went on to write this, like, loads of textbooks and workbooks for people who want to pursue it. And the third style of structured homeschooling that I found, which is also slightly unconventional, is where the parent breaks the academic year into blocks of, say, 10 or 12 weeks. And in each block, they study one topic. And all of the other subjects feed into that topic. So if you're going to study, say, deep oceans, you look at the biology of the fish at the bottom of the ocean and look at how they have a different shape and how different they are from fish that you find elsewhere in the ocean. For maths and physics, you could look at pressures. For history, you could look at the Titanic or something. And if you're going to do English literature, you could look at Hans Christian Andersen and The Little Mermaid and start to write your own stories about living on the bottom of the ocean. And geography, look at the movement of tectonic plates. Which is happening at the bottom of the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans, I think. And then once that 10-week block is finished, the parent then chooses another topic which they investigate in depth. So it could be clothes, it could be planets, it could be, just something completely different. But the point is that the parent is very much the teacher and they're directing the child's study. Now, between those two extremes, I've made the category of partially structured. Now, partially structured, I would include in this Charlotte Mason. She was a Victorian educationalist, and she wrote loads, basically. She wrote shed loads about home education. And on the one hand, she said that children needed to spend lots of time every day outside, playing, experimenting, exploring. But she combined that with aspects of the classical education. So they would be reading high quality literature, they would be learning a musical instrument, studying art, learning poems, looking at maths, studying science. And so there was a little bit of both in there. Free play, but structured lessons. And I'd also include in this category of partially structured Maria Montessori. She recognized that children learn through play, or young children learn through play, but it was always structured play. So she designed certain manipulatives which the children use in a certain way, and through playing with these things in this way, they learn maybe a mathematical principle, or how to read, or how to form their letters. And it seems like a very gentle method. I don't know a huge amount about it, but there are definitely teachers. But at the same time, you'll never get those teachers getting the children to sit down and follow the national curriculum and filling in worksheets all at the same time on the same subject. So, and in this category of partially structured, I would say also, this is where parents just piece together a few things. Maybe they'll use a curriculum for maths and for English, but then with history, they'll take them to museums. Or you'll get parents who say, well, I use a tuition centre 2 mornings a week, and the rest of the time the children at home, and we learn through practical experiences and experiments. And so this is the sort of like what I would say are the 3 broad categories of home education. And when I look back, I realized we started at the completely unstructured end of the spectrum. We'd worked our way through partially structured, and we'd ended up in the last 2 or 3 years, I would say, with very much school at home, which is the kind of education that your local authority likes. And they're usually not very keen on the unstructured side of things. So to explain why we did this, I'm just going to go right back to the beginning, to when me and my husband decided we wanted to homeschool. And we always felt, even in the early days, that we wanted our children to be home educated, but we didn't really know what to do, which was a problem because we had more questions than we had answers. Now, at this time, alhamdulillah, I came across a book called Your Child's Growing Mind by Dr. Jane Healey. Dr. Jane Healey is an educationalist, and she's also an expert in child development. And in this book, she explains what's going on in the child's brain biologically at every stage of their childhood. And she relates this to the best form of education that the child should receive at this time. Now, she is a schooler. She's not a homeschooler. So you have to adapt some of what she says and change it to suit you and to work around. But in the early days, she really helped me. So there were 2 facts that stood out for me. One is that babies have more brain cells than adults. But in adults, there are more connections between the brain cells and the different parts of the brain than there are in babies. So the way I sort of thought about this is, well, okay, if you have an office and it's just jam-packed full of people, but they're not communicating, they're not coordinated, then you're not going to have a very productive office. But if you just reduce the number of people and you make them very coordinated, they're always cooperating, they're always communicating, you're going to have a very productive office. And this is really where the different processes, one of the processes that's happening in the child's developmental stages is basically brain cells are being killed off by the body, but these neural pathways are forming. And a really intelligent, healthy brain in an adult, one that's capable of problem solving and thinking about things in different ways and seeing things in different angles, that sort of brain has lots of neural pathways between the different parts of the brain. So I was thinking, okay, obviously this is a big part of education, is stimulating your child's brain so they get these neural pathways. So the next thing that really struck me from this book was an experiment she described where scientists took a cohort of baby rats and they were going to give them all the nutrition they needed for a really healthy life, and they were going to give them water so they had everything they needed to keep them alive. Half of these baby rats they put into boring cages, so they couldn't exercise, they really didn't have much to do. And then the other half of the baby rats they put into interesting cages. There was a wheel to run around, there was equipment to climb, they had toys to play with, and then every so often the scientists would move everything around so the rats didn't get too used to one setup in their cage. They were always being stimulated. And when the rats reached maturity, they killed them, put their brains under microscopes and examined them. What they found with the rats which had been raised in boring cages is they didn't have many neural pathways in their brains. They didn't have many connections between the different parts of the brains. So to put it really crudely, these would be stupid rats. They wouldn't be very good at solving problems. And then they did the same with the rats which had been raised in an interesting cage. And they found immediately that these rats had, loads of neural connections between the different parts of the brain. They were great problem solvers. They were really clever rats. But they took this experiment one step further and they went and they caught rats from the wild. They killed them, they looked at their brains, and they just realized these rats were like genius rats. These rats had brains like spaghetti junction. These were just unbelievably brilliant rats. So I sort of read this and I remember thinking, well, what's the equivalent of a boring cage for a child? And I think, and I don't want to cause offense here, but I think the equivalent is probably putting a child in a room by themselves and just getting them to watch a flickering screen all the time. They don't exercise, they don't socialize really, they're just sitting. That's their one activity. And then the second group of rats, I thought, with the interesting cages, I thought, well, what's the equivalent of that? And I immediately thought of my primary school, because there was stimulation, but it was really restricted. So I was in a class with obviously like probably 25, 30 other children, but I was told who to sit next to. We were told when we could talk to each other. We were sometimes told what we could talk about. And then the times for free play was half an hour in the morning and maybe 40 minutes at lunchtime. And we were given tasks to do and activities, but it was really very controlled. So I thought, okay, it's not terrible, but I don't think it was optimal. So then I thought, well, what's the equivalent of a wild rat lifestyle, but for my children? And obviously it is probably the hunter-gatherer society, which is not practical in Bradford nowadays. So I thought, well, the closest I can get to that wild lifestyle where you're playing and exploring and doing your own thing is really unschooling. And at this stage, we saw, when our children were sort of like 4, 5, 6, we really saw our role as just to give the children as much stimulation as possible, as many interesting experiences as possible, to give them this really rich environment. So, we'd go on trips, we met up with friends a lot, so they had lots of time to play. We gave them lots of free time. We went for walks in nature. We went to different museums. And we just, read different stories for them. And we just basically it was the whole idea was just to, get their brains sparking and fizzing and just to get them moving. And, when you watch small children playing, or they just want to move. And it seems to me that that's a very natural thing, like their brains are getting them to move because it's just that's exactly what they need at that time. So, and we were also doing this unschooling thing, obviously, where they were, we were going to cafes, we were going to the supermarket, it was all learning. And then things were going hunky-dory, it was all lovely, it was all fantastic. And then suddenly when my kids were about 7, and sometimes it happens sooner, sometimes it happens later, but let's just say about 7, they changed. And I suddenly realized that, well, things that at one time would have kept them occupied for 3 or 4 hours would keep them occupied for half an hour. And what I was doing, looking back, I think, was just we were revisiting the same pathways. There were no longer educational experience in, say, going to a cafe. It was just a habit. It was something that they knew how to do. They ticked that box and they needed something else. And so this was one point. And then I started getting these kind of bored, attention-seeking behaviors at home, which are really irritating to live with. And I just realized, well, they need more stimulation. They need something else to do. And at this stage of development, obviously, their brains were just moving from that very concrete, literal thinking phase that you get with small children to just, their brains were just capable of a little bit more, and they needed that little bit more stimulation, and they needed a different kind of stimulation. It wasn't enough to just go to bigger parks and play for longer and do more adventurous things. It was like their brains were really ready for that more kind of rational thought, more abstract thought. When you take a child, for example, to a medieval castle, they might sort of run around the ramparts and then go and throw stones in the well to see when they can hear a splash, and then run up and down the Motte and Bailey and just have a great time. But then when you're taking the 9-year-old round, they maybe will listen to the audio guide, and they'll start really picturing what it was like. Oh, this is where the arrow slit was. This is where the cannonball hit the wall. So it's like their level of thinking just started developing and maturing, and they just needed a little bit more. The books that they were reading went from being simple picture books to being adventure stories, to being adventure stories with more nuanced characters, where there was a more intricate plot, where there was just something a bit more happening. And I was discussing this with a homeschooler. She had a 20-year-old son, I think, who she'd home educated all the way through, and then she had 2 younger children who were like 8 and 9. And she was using this thing called Sue Patrick's workbox system. With this, basically, I bought my children a set of 12 workboxes, like just a unit. I think I used shoe boxes or something. And in each box, there was a different activity I put in for the children. And so one box could contain a jigsaw, another box could contain some colouring in. But then there were also boxes which would contain a sticker book for history, or a box which would contain a science experiment, or a sheet of paper to do, or an exercise from CGP book. And so my children knew that when they woke up on a workbox day, they had to start at 9 o'clock and they had to go through their workboxes. And about the same time, we also came across a maths curriculum called Math UC. I described it to a Montessorian, and she said it sounded like it was rooted in Montessori. And again, it's designed for home educators, and it's just a very structured way of getting through the different types of maths. And my children went from, like, say, adding and subtracting and multiplying to, using more complicated maths like fractions, and then, onto equations and trigonometry. So I found that they really needed this stimulation. And when I started bringing more things into the curriculum that were sit down things and exercises that were really getting that, getting the old grey cells moving, getting the sort of high levels of thinking moving, they enjoyed it and they responded well to it. And I didn't get the bored behavior so much. I didn't get the squabbling and the arguing and the bickering all the time. The attention seeking just stopped, basically. But at the same time, we were still having trips out. We were still going for social meetings. We were, there was still a lot of free play, but there was that structure. So things were going hunky-dory again. Everything's moseying along. We're doing well. And then when my children are about 13, maybe 14, usually about 13, they hit puberty. And I can safely say nothing has ever prepared me for puberty with any of my children. It's not a bad thing. You know, people always make it sound like it's a really terrible phase, and it's not. But I've never been able to predict what kind of adult has emerged from the chrysalis. I've never been able to say, oh, this child's going to be like this, and it's happened. They've always surprised me. But one thing I have noticed with all of them is a few things. So one is that they all went through a stage where they craved solitude. And that is not easy in a house of 11 people. Most of them were sharing bedrooms, but they all managed to have times where they'd just be able to go into a room by themselves and do their own thing. It was always halal. It wasn't ever bad, but it was just, say, my daughters did crafts. One of my sons was really into reading. Another one devised these kind of board game things that he'd play by himself. It was all with marks on a paper and dice and stuff. And I never worked out what he was doing, but he'd just go and do that. Another did DIY, you know, and sort of made things with twigs and with did sort of, I think he made tuspies for a while, actually, one of them did. So that was one thing. Another thing I noticed is that they all looked for role models outside the family. And they also took up hobbies and interests that got them outside of the family that me and my husband couldn't join in. And I don't know whether it was a conscious decision on their part or a subconscious decision, but there was definitely an indication that they wanted to be outside, that home was maybe a bit stifling for them. So, for example, my sons took up road cycling. They joined a cycling club, and they would go off into the Yorkshire Dales with a load of skinny, athletic men. Obviously, I wasn't going to join them, and neither was my husband. My daughters have taken up jiu-jitsu and judo and boxing, of all things. I'm not going to do any of those things, and I can't help feeling that that's kind of something that they wanted to do. Oh yeah, and then and they started to look for role models outside of the home and their friends. So if you'd have given them a choice when they were 15, 16, 17, would you like to come on a camping trip with me and your father, or would you like to go with your friends? I wouldn't have seen them for dust. You know, they wouldn't even looked over their shoulders at us. They just wanted to be with their friends. And definitely with my children, they've also looked for role models. My daughter, for example, is studying at Greensville Trust, and she's had some classes with the Ustadh and Najiba. When she spent time with the Ustadh and Najiba, she's literally walking on air for a week. And it's not personal. I think she just needs somebody who's not me and who's not her father. She wants somebody outside. So I took all of that into account, and I thought, well, they're not ready to fly the nest, but they obviously are looking out into the big wide world and hoping to establish themselves in that world one day as independent adults. So they weren't flying the nest, but they were sort of jumping up and down, flapping their wings rather a lot. And I started to think, well, given our situation, given who we are and where we are and everything, what is going to be the best way for them to transition from being at home with me most of the time to being in the wide world, where they'll have to find work and where they'll have to go through all the complications and difficulties of employment. And it was obvious to me that the best bridge was going to be college. And to go to college, I also realized, well, the best thing that I can do for them is to help them get GCSEs. Because if they have enough GCSEs that they've passed, then they'll be able to have a better selection of courses. They could maybe choose which they'll have a better selection of colleges, and also they'll be in a higher class. They won't be with the kids who are doing retakes at a lower level. So I started thinking, okay, we need to do GCSEs. Now, immediately that shifted us from being this partially structured homeschooling into this structured homeschooling, because we were then immediately following the national curriculum. I bought correspondence courses for them, so they would have assignments to do every month, which they would send off to a tutor, and they'd get feedback from that. When it came to their exams, we would sit down together and I would go through past papers with them and mark them. I really moved from being the facilitator I'd been in their early years to becoming a tutor. And it was very structured. It was, they still had hobbies, they still had interests, they still had things to do that they enjoyed, but there was definitely a school at home mainstay for our time. Now, one thing that surprised me with the GCSEs is that my children, by and large, enjoyed them. And looking back, I think their brains were just absolutely ready for that kind of more intricate thoughts, more intricate way of thinking. And this also ties in with the classical model of an education from about the age of 15 for the rest of your life. You're in this stage called the rhetoric stage, which is where you can articulate opinions you formed, looking at the facts, using reason, using logic, using, sensible thought processes. So we had lots of very interesting and very good conversations because of the GCSE syllabuses. I think especially history, sociology, English literature, to a degree English language. A typical question in is, okay, this is a quote, discuss how much you agree with it. And so the child is then going, okay, well, I agree with it for these reasons. And then they have, even if they, then you have to say, however, the counter argument is this. And then the last paragraph, however, the counter argument is this. So they're really having to look at problems or like ideas and, historical facts, for example, or characters in a book or whatever, from all different angles. And that's really interesting. And that's a really pleasant process to watch your children go through. And, most of them found the science very interesting. I'm not going to lie and say that all of my children took to GCSE courses like little ducks to water. The one that really springs to mind is my daughter, who has dyslexia and dysgraphia and dyscalculia, so she really struggled with the maths. And she was okay maybe with the arithmetic style questions, but anything which was the higher levels, like simultaneous equations or trigonometry, they were just really hard for her. She had to work really hard, and we both did. At the end, alhamdulillah, she got a 4, which is the lowest pass grade you can get. And we were, alhamdulillah, so proud of her because she worked really hard to get there. Now, what motivated her there obviously wasn't a love of the subject or a natural inclination for it. What motivated her is the fact that she wanted to get into college. And I just said, look, all you have to do is tick this maths GCSE box and you won't have to do it again. And that's really what drove her forward. So that's a sort of overview of what happened with us with homeschooling. And then I sort of thought, well, I just did a little bit of very informal investigation into what's happening into the wider homeschooling community, what other people are doing. So as a rule, what I think I've seen when I look at TikTok and all the websites and YouTube and all of this, is that when people are really enthusing about autonomous or unschooling methods, they tend to have young children. And I'm not saying this is exclusive, because one thing I love about homeschooling is it's very diverse. There's lots of diverse ways of educating your children, which is just brilliant, especially if you have children who are neurodiverse. I have seen children who are sort of unschooled and in the unstructured styles of homeschooling all the way through. What I've noticed is they tend to have a lot of initiative. They tend to be very happy. They're confident because they're used to mixing with all different people from different backgrounds and different ages. And so it is possible to use those unstructured styles all the way through. But as a rule, I don't see that happening very often. It tends to be, I think, younger children whose mothers are enthusing about going to the cafe being an educational experience. It doesn't happen when your child's 16. you know, I've never heard the mother of a 16-year-old saying, you know, we went to the park and he kicked leaves and he collected conkers and it was really educational for him. It was so much fun because, you know, not for a typical 16-year-old. Now, with the partially structured styles of homeschooling, where I've included Charlotte Mason and like tuition centers and this kind of thing, it's not uncommon in these ages for like a typical website might say something like, well, we were home educating, and then when my child was 8 years old, we discovered Charlotte Mason, and it just gave us the scaffolding we needed. And since then, I just can't recommend this highly enough. Or, you know, this is my child, and he's learning 3 musical instruments, and he's 10 years old, and we're following Charlotte Mason. It's not just this. I mean, like I say, you'll get people who are saying, well, we've got this tuition center that's running 3 days a week, 3 mornings a week, and it's doing maths, English, and science for children aged 7 to 11 or something. So again, it's not conclusive, but there seem to be a lot of, or, you know, like people who'll use a curriculum for maths, but will teach the other subjects informally. Now going up to the structured homeschooling, there was an exam center, local exam center, and in one season they had 150 external candidates. So external candidates tends to mean homeschooled. Obviously, some of those children were doing several GCSEs. So you're looking here at several hundred GCSEs being taken in this area alone. And you don't do GCSEs without them being structured. You know, you have to go sit down and go through the syllabus and cover the content. And then you have to go through past exam papers and work out how the examiner wants you to answer each question. And that the only way that happens is with tuition, whether it's you doing the tutoring or an online teacher or whoever, you will have to do some sit down tuition. So obviously, when I went to the exam center, my daughter was taking exams at the time. All of these kids were teenagers. And yes, it's possible to have young children taking GCSEs, but certainly a big chunk of the teenagers who were being homeschooled in my area were doing GCSEs, and so they had to have some structure there. Now, what I would say again is there are people who use the structured styles of homeschooling all the way through. Just casually, what I've observed is people who try and do very structured homeschooling with young children. It seems to me that the parent burns out. I don't want to, you know, like say to people, you're not allowed to homeschool to make your child do the national curriculum if they're 5 years old. But what I've seen is that to try and recreate school at home for young children is kind of an unnatural process, and it's very difficult to make them sit down and learn as they would in school if you're not in school. So that's basically what I've got to say. I hope that's been useful to somebody, inshallah ta'ala. If anybody does have any comments to make, I don't know if anyone's got any questions. If you haven't, then I'm absolutely fine. If you have, then inshallah ta'ala Hind can answer them.
Jazakallah khair, Katie. I really appreciate that. There are a few questions, but before we go into questions, there's a teacher from Stewards 1 who just wanted to make comment and bridge between Katie's talk and the Q&A. And then Katie, there's a question in the chat now, inshallah. So
Assalamu alaikum, jazakumullah khairan, Sister Katie. And so I'm the instructor for IT related courses at Stewards, and as you know, I was a mentor for one of your sons, Hood, and I just wanted to emphasize that what you've done has been very successful. And for people who are on the call, Hood, who's your son, mashallah, got A stars in his A levels, A stars in physics, A star in maths, A star in I can't remember, and he did 4 A levels. And on top of that, he's a Hafiz of Quran. And he was learning Java programming with me. He was learning decentralized computing, and he was very good in everything. There's nothing you could tell who to do that you probably won't do to the highest level. And I noticed that he was also a master of the Arabic language. So, mashallah, whatever you've done, obviously everything's by Allah's tawfiq, is something that should be promoted and should be looked up to and replicated. And I hope, inshallah, you have the time to keep sharing your experiences for others to benefit. Unfortunately, Hood had to go to Egypt because he was very keen. He wanted to study Deen. So he couldn't complete the programming courses we were doing. But I said, look, when you come back, we're going to have to complete this. Or while you're there, we can be doing it at the same time as your Deen studies. So I just wanted to make that comment because I think what you're saying may sound mundane, such as learning GCSE and maths, and it sounds simplistic, but I think, and I know it's not easy for someone to promote themselves and their family when they're talking, but if I could say that just to inspire people to go on that journey with your support, inshallah.
Sure. I mean, I'm stunned, really stunned. Jazakallah khair, and thank you so much, brother. I mean, yeah, alhamdulillah, Hood went AWOL, basically. He disappeared to Egypt despite my advice.
Yeah, I tried to stop him from going because I really thought he was a genius that could help in the IT field, but alhamdulillah, he's doing what he feels.
Yeah, he's doing what he wants to do, alhamdulillah. What I would say is that one thing that really helps with learning with children is to leave the learning until their brains are really ready. And I think this is something Maria Montessori mentioned when she said sensitive periods. But if you try and push, like sometimes people will think, oh, I want my child to become Hafidh al-Quran, so I'll start teaching them when they're 2. And what you're going to do is really put them off. You know, if you try and do this, like you'll get people sort of putting their kid, like very young children, and they're going to school full time and they're doing Kumon outside of school and they're doing this and their parents are pushing them and pushing them. And it's like, you know what, when that child is ready to learn that maths, if they're up to doing it, then they'll just absorb it. They'll just, so because you know, you can't, I think I heard somebody saying once in Sufism, you don't feed a baby a steak. And it's the same with learning and with education. You don't go and take your child and give them really heavy formal lessons and expect it to go well. You know, their brains will change and they'll be ready for those lessons and they'll actually want them. So, yeah. Jazakallah khairan, brother. I mean, I'm really touched. I mean, subhanAllah, I don't think I have to listen to that recording again.
How did he there? Okay, so Jazakallah khair. So there's I want to encourage anyone who wants to actually like open your mic and ask Katie a question live. That would be great. I appreciate the typed questions, but you have her here. Sometimes it's easier to actually talk something through and explain yourself. So I want to encourage that also. So you can just raise your hand if you want to do that, or just open your mic. But there is a question here that someone asked. I missed what age they started preparing. You started preparing for GCSEs through college.
So it would have been about 13-ish. Like really their brains were definitely ready for that. You realize that the books they're reading are quite complicated. The conversations that you can have with them are quite interesting. They'll start making observations about life and you sort of go, oh, actually, that's quite insightful. And like I say, you know when your children are bored, you know when they're ready for the next stage. Either you'll get bad behavior, they'll be irritating you, or they'll just be bored, you know. And so definitely at that stage, I mean, I'd say sort of 12, 13-ish maybe. But you should have already got the foundations in place. It shouldn't like be like at 13 you suddenly crack open your first maths book. They should already be able to do the arithmetic and have mastered that. And you know, they should be able to read and write, and they should be able to understand grammar and things like that. So it's, you know, it's not like you suddenly spring this on them when they're 14. Definitely that semi-structured phase is where you're building up skills so that they're not complete academic geniuses, but so that they're just ready for that to move up a notch. They're not having to learn things from scratch that they should already have in place. They're not learning about fractions the first time when they're 14. They should have already learned that when they're, say, 9 or 10 or something.
Okay, and then another question says, how can we make Café trips educational?
Okay, so with education, if you think about it, there's different reasons for education. One of them is just to get your child used to the, like able to survive and thrive in society. And so part of that is learning the norms and values of society, how you behave in public, how you dress, how you treat people, how you talk to them. And if you go into a cafe, you're learning all of those things straight away. You also look at money, like, oh, look, this is, £2.50 and I have £5 with me. And so that's £2.50 and we can afford that as well, but we can't afford this. And you can also open it up to questions about, like, say, what do you think we should eat? Is this healthy? Is this something I want to eat now? Should we wait till we get home? Should we save some money here? And so, literally, like, you'll see people talking about, going to a grocery store or something, and it'll be, like, well, we need 10 apples, so you count the apples into the bag. Each apple costs 30p, so can you work out roughly how much that's going to cost if they're up to that? Another thing, like, it's not cafes, and I'm wandering off cafes now, but something my kids have always loved is going to car boot sales when they're little, and they do chores around the house to earn money. And then over the summer months we go to car boot sales, and then they've got, like, lots of different types of money in their hand, lots of coins basically, and they've got to talk to the stall holders. I'm not there, they just run off, but they'll sort of like say, okay, this is 50p, and so I've got a 20p, a 20p and a 10p. And so you can you can push educational experiences into just about every situation, but a really big important part of education is just learning how to behave and learning how to talk to people and how to dress. And so what you can get with one argument against schooling is that when you're in a classroom, you're just learning to behave in that classroom. You're just learning to follow the rules of the school. Whereas if you're outside in the real world, you're learning the rules of the real world, which are the ones you need in life.
There's another question. Would you recommend setting up a homeschool environment within the home once one begins more structured learning, i.e. always sitting in one designated room or corner designed for learning during the homeschool hours, like they would in a school or a tutoring setting? Or would you say this does not matter in your experience?
Like with us, because there are so many people in the house, the children tend to do their school, what I'd call their schoolwork, around the dining room table. We haven't really got a corner of the house where we can say this is a study and you've got to go, and this is where you go to study. We do have a rule that I don't want the young children having computers upstairs, and they don't have phones. So it's like when my children start college, then I can't really control them after that point. But certainly I wouldn't ever, the only room that the children could go and have a designated area for studying is their bedrooms, and I wouldn't want them upstairs really with a computer. No, I mean, I suppose it's what's possible for you. Like with us, because there's just so many people in the house, I can't have an area which is designated as a schoolroom or as a school area. And so my children tend to work at the dining room table, which is the area that we've got.
Sorry, there's a lot of questions. Is there any way we can contact Sister Katie? I'm an early years teacher. My son is 3 right now, and I'm in my comfort zone, but I feel clueless of what I do when he's ready to prepare for GCSEs, inshallah.
He's 3.
It does say 3.
Okay.
Maybe she wants you to walk her along the whole journey, inshallah.
I mean, inshallah ta'ala, just get that brain stimulated, and inshallah ta'ala, I mean, we don't even know what the education system is going to look like in that time. I mean, there's talks of it changing, and so we don't even know what's going to be happening in the world at that time. So just inshallah ta'ala, do your best to raise a happy, healthy child, inshallah.
Also, just to let you guys know, we had an early years teacher come last couple weeks, and she talked a lot about the neural development and its importance and how to stimulate that. And actually, she's trained from preschool education all the way up into adult education. And I said, what do you feel is the most important. And she said the early years, and she said every time I talk to a parent with an older child, it's always connected back to the early years and what wasn't done then. And so my own mother is an early years teacher for that reason. It's a very important time that's very highly underestimated, I think. And so mashallah, Katie's given really good guidance about, you know, what to do in that period. Someone
Are
asked,
those lessons still online? Like, could we access those lessons if we want to?
yeah, those lessons should be up on Stewards. Yeah, if you go to the multimedia area of the website, you'll be able to see the recordings, inshallah. Yeah, I think they're up on YouTube too, but I'm not sure if they're listed. So
Okay.
yeah, inshallah. Someone else asked, how were you able to manage looking after yourself and maintaining the energy to homeschool all of the children? Did you seek help, outside help?
I think I really love what I do. You know, it's like, and I also did a personality test a while back, and it came out really high for enthusiasm. My children, and I was really surprised. I was like, oh, it says I'm really enthusiastic here. And my kids were like rolling their eyes, just going, yeah, you know, like you just, that's it, you know. And it's so like, it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like it's draining all the time. You know, it's like I can genuinely enjoy, like I've genuinely loved doing the GCSEs with my kids. I don't know if they have, but I have. And I've really enjoyed the stages where, you know, there's just a joy in watching your children play with their little. And it's really nice watching them develop from being able to, you know, just write their letters and then being able to move up and, you know, read books and have discussions with you. So I would say that that's been the main thing for me, is that I've genuinely enjoyed what I'm doing, and I like being with my kids, and we like being together as a family. And those are things which I'd say are sort of precursors for home education, is that you have to sort of want to do it and really, really like doing it. I mean, definitely there are times with the self-care when I've done absolutely none. I really had to sort of, I suppose one thing I've been very strict with when my children were little is that they did have a bedtime. And the reason they had a bedtime is that it would give me a few hours off in the evening where I could go and read a book and just have some time away from my kids. That is important. If you're with your kids all the time, then just that, like, make their bedtime 7 o'clock, which is quite early. And then you've got 2-3 hours where you're not surrounded by people saying mummy, mummy, mummy all the time. And also when you're together all the time, I heard I'll explain the reverse. I heard was a mother of 6, and when the school holidays started, she'd cry. And I think, like, when you're at home together all the time as a homeschooling family, you get into routines and you get into ways of doing things, and you sort of learn how to do things in quite a relaxed way. I actually find it quite stressful to have to go out and do things. Like if I have to be out of the house at 9 o'clock in the morning, it's quite difficult to get the kids together, which is what you obviously have to do all the time with school. So yeah, I mean, that's what I'd say, is you can work home, like get a routine which allows you to have a break from your kids sometimes. Keep working on your relationship with your husband so you actually get to know each other. And, you know, enjoy what you do, enjoy your time with your kids.
Okay. First week into home ed, it's expensive. Help. How do you decide what resources, what clubs you should invest in?
Yeah. It doesn't have to cost a fortune, but it can do. I mean, Hind, you're a home educator as well. So, I mean, what would you say here? I mean, I'd say you don't need to go and spend a fortune on loads of tuition, loads of clubs, loads of curriculums, loads of workbooks. I'd start at, it depends on the age of your child as well. You know, but we haven't spent a fortune. Like, we really haven't. You know, it's like we've bought the Math UC curriculum. I mean, to be honest with you, we buy a lot of stuff from charity shops, a lot of things from eBay, a lot of, you know, you don't have to spend loads of money. It would really depend on your child, on what you decide to spend money on. The reason I'm waffling is because there isn't really like a hard and fast rule for this. The most expensive part of the homeschooling for me has been the fact I'm not working. And so I'm not earning money. So I'm not, bringing in this double income that we would have if we'd not homeschooled. But week to week, we don't really spend a huge amount of money. I mean, I'd say you're only 1 week into it. So I'd give yourself plenty of time to just kind of, breathe and just get into a routine and just get into, find your groove, get into the flow of it. And then slowly but surely bring things in as you need to. But things like a trip to the park, that doesn't cost any money if you've got a small child. There's other things like we joined English Heritage, and that had like you paid for a year, but I think they allowed like up to 6 children or something on a family ticket, or look for deals going on. There's free museums. There's all sorts of things going on which don't need to cost a fortune. I mean, you're only into it 1 week, so I'd say take a breath. Don't go and buy everything. Don't go and try everything. Give yourself a bit of time to really settle into the groove, and then start spending money as and when you really recognize that it needs to be spent.
Okay, any advice for home educating multiple age children? I have a 7, 6, 2, and 5.
7, 6, 2, and 5. Mashallah. So 7, 6, and 5. That's like me. And like Hind, actually, alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
Okay, so the 2-year-old obviously is in the homeschool. The 2-year-old, needs to be occupied with something else while you do. I mean, this is where I used 7, 6, and 5. I mean, the 5-year-old even is sort of like, I would say, lots of trips that you can all do together. Like I say, going to a playground at that age, they should all be able to play together in a playground. And then things such as Lego, they can all do together. Just be careful with the 2-year-old and Lego, obviously. But then this is where I found that workbox system worked quite well, or getting the children tasks that they can complete by themselves that are age appropriate. Your children are still quite young, but I'd say like a 7-year-old can sit down and maybe work through a page of maths, or work through a CGP book, or work through a textbook by themselves, do like short lessons, like say 15 minutes, half an hour. And just get them into the habit of sitting down and completing those lessons by themselves. So that, like you've got your 7-year-old doing one set of work, your 6-year-old doing another set of work, and then the 5-year-old and the 2-year-old maybe going off to play or something. And then you can also do things like baking together as a family, go for walks, go to museums, that kind of thing, which they can all take part in.
Okay, mashallah, the questions keep coming in. I want to honor your time, Katie, because we're an hour, because our talks are usually an hour. So do you have time to answer more questions?
I do. Is there anybody else who wants to? Do you want to answer some questions as well, Hind?
No, I'm fine for you to answer the questions. I just want to be mindful of time. So if anyone needs to go now, you can go, and inshallah there'll be a recording. And for Katie, how much longer do you want to give?
I mean, if we go for 5 more minutes, I mean, if we save the questions and then break down, like I'm guessing some of the questions, if we can break them, save the questions and look at putting them into categories sometimes, and maybe you can run some different webinars or whatever on stewards where we look at these different categories, because these are obviously, like say, multiple age children. I mean, there's a few of us who've taught multiple age children, so it might be an idea to have a number of people coming in and saying, well, this is what I did, this is what I did. That kind of thing. So maybe save the questions and we can look at them some other time.
Okay, so we're gonna have 5 more minutes, everyone, inshallah. And by the way, we're having a follow-up to this webinar on and we're inviting a few more mothers. So one is a mother of 8 and one is a mother of 6, I think. And we're going to have like kind of like a roundtable discussion where they're going to give more details and feedback in addition to this. So if you guys want to sign up for that, then I'll save those questions maybe, and they'll be the top of the list next time. But otherwise, someone asked, why did your children go to college and not decide to continue home ed into A levels?
Because by that time they really did. I think they'd been at home with me then until they were 16, and it felt, I could tell it was stifling for them. I could tell that they wanted to go out into the world. They just wanted a, you know, more stimulation, basically. They were adults. I think I did say to one of my sons, like, I've just sat down with all of them and I've had this discussion, like, do you want to go to college or would you prefer to stay at home with me? And they've all said, we want to go to college now. I haven't taken it personally, but it's just like I can feel, it almost feels a bit unnatural for a 16, 17-year-old to be at home with his mum all the time. And I felt this quite strongly. And it isn't that I pushed them out, but they genuinely wanted to move on and just sort of, like I say, they were just sort of flapping their wings a bit, looking out into the outside world and just saying, well, actually, we want to, you know, we want to go and do our own thing. And I mean, they did have hobbies and interests, but they were always just, you know, like being at home with your mum and going cycling a lot. You know, they were just ready. They were men, they were women. You know, they wanted to sort of feel that they were growing up and becoming more mature somehow. That was really my feeling. Now, I do know people who have home educated in A levels. I think their children probably chose to do that. And I also know people who only started homeschooling when it came to A levels. You know, their children maybe had bad experiences at GCSEs, and when they came across A levels at home, they were just like, wow, this is brilliant. I don't have to waste all that time in school that I used to waste. But definitely with my children, they wanted to move on, and I was more than ready for them to move on. So there you go.
Yeah, and then there's did your elder children teach the younger ones to understand certain topics?
No. I mean, I found one thing I do find very nice with a large family, and is that a lot of their social needs are taken care of. They definitely form friendships with each other, and then they break up those friendships, and you know, they definitely have it's made a lot of the homeschooling a lot easier for me than, say, I don't know how people do it with one child. Having 9 children did make it a lot easier, but no, when it came to the education, it's really been me teaching them, and my husband does the religious side of things. But no, it just I don't know if I could have got them to. I mean, I sort of feel the older ones have to have their own lives. They shouldn't be there. Like, they're really good with the younger children, but I'm still the mother and my husband's still their father. And so it isn't really the job of my sons to step in as surrogate fathers or my daughters to step in as surrogate mothers. I don't know if other people have made it work. I don't know if other people feel differently. But that's just how it's worked in our family.
There's 1 minute, one last question. Sorry, everyone. I promise I'll write the questions down, inshallah, that are left over. It said, will it be harder to start homeschooling from year 7 secondary school?
From stupid.
Okay. I mean, so would it be hard to start? Again, it really, really varies for a whole load of things. Like, why does the child want to be homeschooled in year 7? Because you do get some children who just want to be homeschooled for whatever reason. What I would say is that you're going to have to bring in some structure and make sure that you're up to doing the tuition side of things. But I mean, I don't think it would be really impossible. I mean, I don't see why it would be impossible to take a child out of school in their secondary years, provided they didn't spend all of their time looking back with the eye of longing, saying, oh, I miss my friends, I miss PE lessons, I miss art, I miss school was so great. The best thing to do, I mean, again, this is one of those questions where there are just so many possible reasons for the child being homeschooled from year 7 onwards, and so many possible permeations of what's going on in the family and what the setup is and how things are working. It's really difficult to just give a simple yes and no answer, but I don't see why in the right circumstances it would be impossible or it would be too hard. I think you should be able to do it if the circumstances are right. Sorry, that's a really vague answer. The other thing is, honestly, like, what I would say is that if you're thinking of homeschooling or whatever, try and find other people who've got similar structures to you and talk to them about what they did and how they did it. So I learned so much from speaking to home educators in home education meetings and things. And they just say, like the lady who recommended Sue Patrick's workbox system to me, you know, she'd been there. Her son was at university, I think. And so she was home educating the other two, and she was very laid back, and she just said, this is what I do, and it works. And so if you can find other people who have home educated from the secondary years, and I don't know if Stewards One would be able to maybe have a forum or something where people can get together and discuss these things, or, you know, people can raise questions and maybe get them answered online, so that there's like a resource here where you can maybe connect people to where they can get the answers from. Because really with homeschooling, it's just experience is the thing. You need to speak to people who've kind of done it, and maybe it's worked for them and maybe it hasn't, but they can sort of say to you, well, actually, this is how it went for me. This is what I did.
Yeah, inshallah, definitely we'll be looking into that. So guys, we're 7 minutes over. I want to respect Katie's time. MashaAllah, Allah reward you for coming today, and for all of you for coming and staying for this long. Inshallah, we will send you an email about the follow-up to this talk, and Katie will be here again, inshallah, and we'll have a few other sisters who are here as well, and I will record some of the questions so that we can make sure they're answered at the beginning of the next session. And inshallah, we appreciate you all, and jazakallah khair to Katie, and take care everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much. Jazakallah khairan.